The truth you're about to hear has been buried beneath manicured lawns, decorative shutters, and white picket fences. It was never meant to reach you. And yet, here you are. The camera feed clicked on at exactly 2:04 a.m. No birdsong. No crickets. Just the low hum of electricity coursing through the steel walls of my workshop and a dark figure pacing outside, illuminated only by the flicker of the motion sensor light. She moved like she owned the silence. A ghost in sandals. A suburban specter wrapped in entitlement. That was Karen. You know the type. You've met her. You've nodded politely, kept your head down, smiled at HOA meetings you never wanted to attend, all to avoid this moment. But what if I told you it's not just her? That every suburb, every HOA-run community, breeds this exact phenomenon? This story isn't about a car. It isn't about a workshop. It's not even about revenge. It's about control. About the silent war raging behind those quarterly newsletters and friendly violation notices. A war most men never realize they're fighting until they've already surrendered, their peace, their privacy, their power. I didn't choose to become part of that war. But I wasn't about to be another casualty. When I found Karen's white Escalade parked inside my locked workshop, not beside it, not in front of it, inside, I didn't just feel anger. I felt violated. There was no note of remorse, no attempt at contact. Just a yellow sticky note slapped dead center on the windshield. I needed shade. Thanks. The audacity. The casual dismissal of boundaries. The absolute confidence that no one would stop her. Because in her mind, and in the system that supports her, I didn't matter. Not as a homeowner. Not as a man. Not as someone who built that shop with his own hands, pouring every dollar an hour into something real. She thought the rules didn't apply to her. But that's the cruel joke of HOA tyranny, the rules apply only to those who try to follow them. And that's the first forbidden truth I'll tell you, in a system designed to enforce order, power always warps the rules. And the HOAs? They're not about peace. They're about surveillance and submission. You may think your community is safe. Structured. Civilized. But what if I told you it's a labyrinth, one designed to trap strong men in soft cages? With meetings instead of trials. Fines instead of whips. And Karens instead of guards. They don't need fences. They've got bylaws. They don't need chains. They've got compliance officers. And if you push back? If you weld your doors shut and say, no more? That's when the system bares its teeth. So buckle in. Because this isn't a petty neighbor feud. It's not a prank. It's not even revenge. This is the unraveling of a lie that's been sold to you your whole life. The lie of peace through paperwork. Of safety through submission. Of order through obedience. And once you see what's behind the hedge-trimmed curtain, you'll never unsee it again. She parked inside my soul. That's what it felt like. Because that workshop, it wasn't just a building. It was my temple. My fortress. My one piece of ground that hadn't been seized by forms, fines, and fabricated courtesy. It was the only thing I still controlled. And when Karen left her SUV there, like a lion marking territory, she wasn't just blocking a vehicle. She was testing the system. And me. Let me explain something most men don't realize until it's too late. HOAs aren't about property values. They're about behavioral economics. Social engineering through soft tyranny. A machine engineered to convert freedom into formality, and compliance into currency. You don't just buy a house under an HOA. You lease your masculinity. They monitor your lawn height. They measure the visual harmony of your siding. They send notices if your truck sticks out 2 inches past the sidewalk. But they never measure the damage they do to your spirit. Karen knew that. She was the system's favorite weapon, entitled, protected, unaccountable. She didn't need power, the rules gave it to her. And when I complained to the HOA board, when I showed them the footage of her trespassing, her violating every written and unwritten rule of decency? They offered me silence dressed as diplomacy. Let's not escalate things. Let's resolve this peacefully. Let's stay neighborly. Translation? Sit down and take it. Because HOA boards aren't there to protect homeowners. They exist to protect order. And if a man disturbs that order, even for just cause, he becomes the threat. Let me say this again for the men who've been silent too long. Suburbia doesn't reward strength. It punishes resistance. So I stopped playing their game. No more warning notes. No more polite messages. No more waiting for a system that was never designed to defend me. I sealed the workshop shut. 6 welds. 3 doors. Steel on steel. A vault with 1 trapped guest inside. And then? I left. I didn't flee. I ascended. Because once you realize you're inside a prison, escape isn't cowardice. It's clarity. As my flight climbed over state lines, my phone lit up with messages from Karen. The tone changed fast, from casual confusion to legal threats to full-blown shrieks of victimhood. But I didn't answer. I didn't blink. I just watched it all from a distance. You see, when a man removes himself from the equation, when he no longer fears retaliation, the balance of power shifts. Because men like us, we are not meant to comply. We are meant to command. And if you've ever stared down the barrel of HOA injustice, if you've ever been fined for leaving a ladder in your backyard, if you've ever felt that cold burn of being right but powerless, you already know what I'm talking about. The game isn't fair. It never was. But if you're willing to play by your own rules, you might just find the power they never wanted you to discover. 2 days into my vacation, the panic really set in. Karen wasn't used to being ignored. She was used to compliance. She thrived on attention, reaction, and the subtle power of proximity. But now, she was on the outside of the fortress, pacing, circling, powerless. And that's the second truth they don't want you to realize. These people aren't just entitled, they're addicted. Addicted to control. To the illusion of importance. But most of all, to your reaction. The HOA system was designed for them. Not for builders. Not for doers. Not for men who think and work and create. It was built for overseers. Those who contribute nothing but enforce everything. Karen had been handpicked by this machine. Groomed by bylaws. Fed on polite phrases that hide blades in their belly. And the moment I refused to play the part of the obedient neighbor, she spiraled. Her calls turned from concern to hysterical. Her texts went from legal jargon to late-night rants written in all caps. She accused me of theft, vandalism, harassment, the entire buffet of suburban buzzwords. But behind all that noise was fear. Not of the law. Not even of being exposed. No, what she feared most was the same thing the entire system fears. A man who acts without permission. Because once a man remembers his authority, not the kind granted by forms or titles, but the kind forged in fire and solitude, no laminated guideline can hold him. And so Karen did what all weak enforcers do when their weapon fails. She tried to become the victim. She called the cops. She cried in front of officers. She painted herself as a woman trapped, not because she entered illegally, but because she didn't expect consequences. The officers shrugged. The footage was clear. Even the locksmith she hired refused to cut my welds. Liability, he said. Smart man. And here's where it gets darker. On day 4, an anonymous email hit the HOA board. Inside? Proof that Karen's registration was expired. Her license? Suspended, pending a hit-and-run case in the next county over. You think that was a coincidence? You think a woman like Karen, so bold, so reckless, didn't have skeletons? No, brother. This system protects predators. But only until someone shines a light. And that's what I had become, not just a man with a welder, but a mirror. One she couldn't look away from. She tried to flip the narrative. She brought in a news van. She ranted on the community forum, accusing me of psychological abuse and neighborhood terrorism. But the tide had turned. Neighbors spoke. Footage spread. And the more she screamed, the more the truth settled in. Karen wasn't trapped. She was revealed. So if you're still watching, if you've ever been pushed by paper tyrants or silenced by small men in big chairs, hear me now. You are not powerless. But they want you to believe you are. Because the moment you stop asking for permission, the game ends. By day 6, the mask was fully off. Karen wasn't hiding her tactics anymore. The subtlety, the faux politeness, the laminated charm, all gone. What remained was raw desperation. And it was loud. She posted a thread on the community forum titled, "Urgent, my neighbor is a danger to us all." In it, she accused me of psychological warfare. Said I was a threat to public safety. Claimed I was weaponizing welding equipment and holding her vehicle hostage as an act of domestic terrorism. But here's the third forbidden truth. When a system loses control of a man, it tries to redefine him as dangerous. It doesn't matter if you followed every rule. Doesn't matter if you have footage, paperwork, permits. The moment you refuse to yield, the HOA, and those like Karen, won't call you right. They'll call you unstable. Because labeling a man as unstable is the easiest way to strip him of credibility. Suddenly, the guy who just wanted to fix classic cars in peace becomes a public threat. A problem. An incident waiting to happen. It's psychological deflection, and it works. Until it doesn't. Because here's what Karen didn't count on. The neighborhood had eyes. And those eyes had seen enough. Frank, my neighbor, the man who always quietly watched from across the street, began replying to her posts. Nothing inflammatory. Just truth. You mean the workshop you weren't invited into? Is this the same neighbor you've filed 6 complaints against in the past month? Didn't you flip off his camera? Other neighbors chimed in. People I'd never spoken to. Turns out Karen had left a trail of resentment, hypocrisy, and nonsense. The post was locked by the board in under an hour. The digital tantrum, deleted. And this is where most men miss it. These suburban systems don't run on law. They run on perception. Once that perception cracks, once the curtain lifts, the emperor has no authority. Karen knew it. That's why the next day, she made her boldest move yet. She called code enforcement. Told them I was running an unlicensed commercial garage. Said toxic fumes were endangering the community. Even claimed to have smelled chemical weapons. The inspector? Same guy who approved my permits 2 years ago. He laughed. Told Frank, "This is the cleanest operation I've seen all week," gave a thumbs up, and drove off. And Karen? She watched it all from her porch. No wine glass this time. No smug wave. Just silence. Cold, bitter silence. Because the deeper truth, the one they never want you to say out loud, is this. Most HOA tyrants are not powerful. They're protected. They survive through illusion. Through silence. Through the hope that no one will call their bluff. But when you do, when you stand your ground, gather your proof, weld your own damn doors shut and walk away, they crumble. Not because you hurt them, but because you expose the truth. And that truth? They never had power. Only permission. And I had revoked it. By the 7th day, something strange began to happen. Karen vanished. No more sidewalk patrols. No more porch watch. No more passive-aggressive pacing in yoga pants and overpriced sunglasses. Her white Escalade, now entombed in my sealed workshop, had become a silent monument to her undoing. Dust settled on the windshield like time was writing its own justice. Neighbors started whispering. She's rattled. She's not walking her dog anymore. I saw her crying in the backyard. Part of me, the old part raised on civility and second chances, felt a flicker of sympathy. But then I remembered every complaint. Every lie. Every time she smiled as the system let her trespass and gaslight without consequence. That sympathy died fast. And that leads us to the fourth truth they never say out loud in HOA boardrooms. When men reclaim territory, tyrants retreat. The system isn't built to handle male autonomy. It thrives on compliant frustration, on men who grumble but obey, who fix the problem but never question the rules. And when one of us stops playing nice, the matrix glitches. Because they never expected resistance. Not real resistance. Not resistance forged in fire, built on proof, and sharpened by silence. Let me tell you what I learned in that week. Control is never given. It is taken. The moment I welded those doors shut, I stopped being a member of their game and started being a mirror. A reflection of everything the system fears, a man who doesn't need approval to act. And they don't know what to do with that. Karen's silence wasn't retreat. It was recalibration. She was preparing her next move, hoping I'd blink first. I didn't. Instead, I sent her a text. Just one. Hope your car is doing okay. Workshop still secure. Be back soon. No threats. No insults. Just presence. That's all it took. The next morning, a new complaint hit the HOA board. She claimed I was operating an illegal bunker and suggested I be banned from doing business in the neighborhood altogether. You see the pattern yet? Tyrants don't seek resolution. They seek erasure. When they can't stop you, they try to erase you. Digitally. Socially. Legally. They want to make you disappear. But here's the edge they didn't count on, and if you take nothing else from this video, hear this. Power comes not from what you own, but what you're willing to walk away from without fear. I left that shop sealed, unmoved, untouched, for over a week. Not because I was scared. But because I was free. Karen tried to turn my absence into an opportunity. But in reality, it became her isolation chamber. Her fortress of shame. And by the time I returned, sunburned, peaceful, clear-headed, the entire neighborhood had already chosen a side. Spoiler. It wasn't hers. I returned home just after sunset. The sky burned gold behind the rooftops, casting long shadows across my driveway. Everything looked still. Too still. As if the street itself was holding its breath. Even the wind seemed to hesitate, waiting for what came next. But I didn't rush. I stood there for a moment, suitcase in one hand, the other brushing across the still warm hood of my truck, and let the silence speak. The workshop stood like a sealed tomb. Solid. Unmoving. Undeniable. Inside it, Karen's Escalade sat motionless, untouched, buried in a silence of her own making. She had parked inside my world. Now her vehicle had become the evidence of her hubris. And mine, of something more powerful. A line drawn. A message written not in words but in action. And brother, if you've ever felt the need to take back control, not through violence or noise, but through unapologetic certainty, you know exactly what I mean. Because men like us, we don't fight with screaming. We fight with finality. Frank saw me first. He was on his porch pretending to trim hedges. When our eyes met, he gave me a nod, not the casual kind, but the kind men pass to one another after something unspoken has been earned. Ready for the show? He asked. Been ready since the day she measured my driveway, I replied. I called Officer Grant before I stepped inside. Not because I needed permission, I was long past that, but because when you walk into battle with facts, it's best to bring witnesses. Karen, of course, was already outside. She'd been waiting since sunrise. Eyes bloodshot. Hair wild. Holding a manila folder stuffed with printed screenshots, bylaws, and half-truths. She stormed across the street the moment Grant's cruiser pulled up, shouting like a protester at a coronation. He welded my car in. That's illegal imprisonment. But Grant? He didn't flinch. He looked her dead in the eye and said, Ma'am, we've reviewed everything. You entered a private structure. Uninvited. Unlawfully. He never moved your car. He simply secured his building. And that, right there, was the fifth forbidden truth. Justice isn't loud. It's precise. It's not about emotions or arguments. It's about evidence. It's about ownership. And in this case, it was about a man who documented everything while saying nothing. Karen sputtered. She tried to play the "but it's just a garage" card. Then the "but I didn't know it was private" lie. Then the "he's harassing me" cry. But none of it landed. Because here's the thing about truth. Once it's exposed, it doesn't need to shout. It just stands. Unmoving. Undeniable. I turned to the door. Pulled out the grinder. As the sparks began to fly, hot and final, I felt something shift deep inside me. This wasn't just about a car anymore. This was about identity. About reclaiming what men like us have slowly been taught to surrender, inch by bureaucratic inch. And as those welds cracked, one by one, so did the illusion. The sparks lit the sky like fireworks. One seam. Then another. 6 in total. I wasn't in a rush. Every grind, every screech of metal parting from metal, was intentional, a ritual more than a task. And Karen watched it all. She stood behind Officer Grant, arms crossed so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Her face was twisted, not just with anger, but confusion. Because this wasn't how it was supposed to go. She thought I'd panic. She thought I'd be scared. She thought the HOA would save her, the cops would scold me, the neighbors would rally around her victimhood. But all her expectations had been built on a lie. And now, she was witnessing that lie collapse. The 6th weld popped. The steel door groaned. And then, silence. I stepped back and heaved the doors open. It felt like unveiling a coffin. Inside, her Escalade, pristine, but still. Cold. Unmoving. Entombed in accountability. There was something poetic about it, a luxury vehicle now the centerpiece of her downfall. A sticky note was pressed against the windshield. It read. Next time, call a cab. I hadn't put it there. Frank had. And I won't lie, it was perfect. Karen moved toward the vehicle in a half-run, but Grant raised a hand. Ma'am, before you touch anything, we've got to address some things. She froze. What followed was the final fracture in her little empire. Your vehicle's registration is expired. Your license is still suspended. You are not authorized to operate this vehicle. Karen looked like a marionette with cut strings. Her shoulders collapsed. Her mouth opened, then closed. All the words she was known for, gone. Because here's the 6th truth, the one that never shows up in HOA newsletters. Power is only real when it survives truth. Karen had built her identity on false power, the power of intimidation, regulation, and fake neighborly concern. But when the truth came down on her like a blade, there was nothing left. No HOA title could protect her now. No bylaws. No laminated pamphlets. No crocodile tears. Just her. Standing alone. In front of the one man she thought she could break. And me? I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even smug. I was finished. I had reclaimed more than just my workshop. I had reclaimed myself. And if you're watching this, if you've ever felt the weight of 1,000 small rules grinding down your spirit, if you've ever been fined for a paint shade, or warned for leaving your trash bin out an hour too long, I want you to type something in the comments right now. No more locks. Type it twice. Not for the algorithm. For your transformation. Because that's what this is. Not a story about revenge. A story about rebirth. And when that final door opened, so did the part of me I thought suburbia had buried forever. After the grinder cooled and the dust settled, there was nothing left to say. Officer Grant stood silently, arms crossed, watching as Karen turned in slow circles, first looking at the Escalade like it had betrayed her, then back at me like she wanted to scream but no longer remembered how. The system she weaponized had just turned to vapor. She tried one last move. "I'll be filing charges," she muttered. Grant raised an eyebrow. "On what grounds, ma'am?" "He didn't touch your vehicle. He secured his private building while you parked illegally. There's nothing criminal here. There's not even damage." That word, criminal, it stuck in her throat like poison. Because deep down, she had always believed the rules were hers to bend. But that's the seventh truth no one dares whisper in neighborhoods like mine. HOAs don't enforce fairness. They enforce control. The bylaws aren't written for peace, they're written to corral power. To turn personality into policy. To weaponize preference. Karen wasn't an outlier. She was a product. A perfectly engineered suburban enforcer. Polite on the surface. Bureaucratic beneath. Unrelenting in pursuit of submission masked as community. And I was never supposed to resist. You see, they count on quiet men. On agreeable men. On men so worn down by modern life that they'll just repaint the fence, pay the fine, and swallow the shame. But the moment one man pushes back, the machine groans. Not because it breaks, but because it's never been designed to withstand defiance. I stepped inside my workshop and sat on the stool next to my lift. Everything was as I left it. Tools in order. Lights off. Security feeds quietly blinking in the corner. But it felt different. Not because of the Escalade. Because of what it represented. This wasn't just a vehicle locked behind steel. It was the last weapon Karen had. And I had neutralized it without shouting, without fighting, without playing the villain she so badly needed me to be. And that's what shook her. Because tyrants need opposition. They need someone to scream at, blame, and belittle. They need chaos to justify their control. But when you respond with silence and certainty, they shatter. Frank came by that evening. Brought beer. We sat on lawn chairs across from the shop, just watching the sunset bake against its aluminum walls. He chuckled, shaking his head. "Never seen someone break without being touched," he said. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because what I had just done wasn't about Karen. It was about the system behind her. The HOA board that sat quiet. The neighbors who had been too afraid. The structure built not on strength, but submission. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of guilt. Not because of fear. Because I realized something I'd never allowed myself to fully see before. This wasn't just a victory over Karen. It was a doorway. A crack in the paint that revealed what lies beneath every HOA fence, pamphlet, and polite community bulletin. I dug deep. Late into the night, I started researching the true history of HOAs, not the version they tell you at orientation with cookies and welcome baskets. The real version. And that's when I found the eighth truth, the one that chills your spine once it sinks in. HOAs were never about community. They were about containment. Their origin? Post-World War II. Suburbs rising. Veterans returning. And governments, both local and federal, realizing one truth. If you control the neighborhood, you control the man. It started with zoning, yes. But quickly became more. HOAs were designed to mirror authority, to create mini-states within neighborhoods. Tiny bureaucracies. Each with their own codes, boards, penalties, and enforcement. But without the safeguards, oversight, or due process of real governance. It was the perfect formula. Legal teeth, without constitutional scrutiny. Power, without accountability. Enforcement, masked as volunteerism. A soft dictatorship, hidden behind picket fences. And here's what most don't know. The first HOAs were deeply exclusionary. Many had clauses, explicit ones, that barred certain people from ever buying property. Race. Religion. nationality, even ideas. And while those words were later scrubbed from official documents, the mindset never changed. Today's HOAs may smile more. They may host barbecues. They may have diversity statements. But they are still built on the same architecture. Regulate the individual. Protect the image. Punish the deviation. Karen wasn't some rogue agent. She was a product of the very design. She believed the street was hers. The workshop was hers. Even the space inside it, mine, by law, by labor, by legacy, was hers to use as shade, as leverage, as property by proximity. Because HOAs breed entitlement. And entitlement always morphs into tyranny. I found bylaws from 1973 in our own community documents. One clause read, "All residences shall maintain exterior harmony consistent with the architectural tone and visual culture of the neighborhood." That phrase, visual culture, stuck with me. What does that even mean? It means if they don't like what you represent, they can come for what you own. And that's what this whole thing had been about. It was never about parking. It was about presence. About a man with grease-stained hands and unapologetic independence disrupting their delicate illusion of suburban perfection. My very existence, my self-sufficiency, my peace, my masculine autonomy, was a threat. And so, they activated their immune system. But this time, the virus fought back. Once you see the machine, you can't unsee it. After I cracked open the workshop and cracked open the lie, the mask didn't just slip. It shattered. The HOA didn't respond with apologies. They didn't send out a statement, or even acknowledge the reality caught on camera, broadcast on local news, and whispered across every fence in the neighborhood. Instead, they went quiet. Cold. Coordinated. Calculated. No more casual hellos from board members on evening walks. No more invitations to community cookouts. Not even a reply to my routine lawn maintenance update, something they used to pounce on with emails marked urgent. That's the ninth forbidden truth. HOAs don't correct enemies, they isolate them. Not with confrontation, but with silence. The kind designed to unnerve you, not punish you. Because here's what I learned next. Control doesn't start with rules. It starts with culture. When I exposed Karen, I didn't just challenge her behavior. I threatened the social ecosystem of enforced niceness and quiet obedience. You see, in HOA-controlled neighborhoods, peace is code for compliance. And compliance is achieved through psychological targeting. They smile while they mark you. They wave while they blacklist you. They act friendly while subtly letting the rest of the neighborhood know. That one doesn't play by the rules. And for most men, that's enough to break them. Because they don't threaten your house. They threaten your belonging. That's how the system works. Don't like the shade of your shutters? HOA violation. Too many guests on your lawn? Traffic disturbance. Garage door open too long? Visual disharmony. Unapproved garden gnome? Yes, they'll come for that too. But it's never really about aesthetics. It's always about obedience. And the moment you stop nodding, they switch tactics. You become the aggressive one. The difficult one. The man with a chip on his shoulder. Even if all you ever did was protect your own property. I saw it unfold in real time. Neighbors I'd shared beers with suddenly grew distant. A friend who used to borrow my tools stopped waving. A woman down the block began pulling her kids inside the moment I stepped outside. None of them said anything. They didn't have to. Because fear is contagious. And HOA fear? It's surgical. It doesn't try to destroy you. It tries to reprogram you. To shame you into silence. To convince you that your dignity isn't worth the cost of defiance. To whisper, again and again, it's not worth it. But here's where they miscalculated. I've already paid the price. Isolation doesn't scare me. Reputation doesn't control me. And silence? It's where I build. Because once you understand the truth, you don't fear being watched. You watch them back. The irony of it all? I hadn't changed. I was still the man who helped neighbors move furniture. Still the one who plowed the street during winter when the city forgot. Still the guy who fixed a busted water line for the cul-de-sac when no one else could find the shut-off valve. But now, I was dangerous. Not because of what I did, but because of what I knew. And that brings us to the 10th forbidden truth. Knowledge, in the hands of the autonomous man, is nuclear. The HOA? They thrive on ignorance. They bank on the idea that most men, good men, busy men, tired men, won't read the covenants. Won't challenge the notices. Won't understand that most of what they issue is unenforceable policy, not law. And even when those men push back, the board's greatest weapon is always the same: delay. We'll review it at the next meeting. We've escalated your concern. We've passed it to legal. Let's keep this neighborly, shall we? It's pacification with a smile. Stalling tactics wrapped in courtesy. But when I fought back with code citations, land rights knowledge, and local case law, the board stopped smiling. Because now they were facing something they'd never expected. A man who wasn't just angry. He was informed. And unafraid. And documenting everything. That's when it shifts. Because once you pierce the illusion, once you realize they aren't guardians of order but curators of power, you stop reacting, and start designing. You start building your life around strength, not acceptance. And brother, here's what they fear more than anything. A man who doesn't need the system. A man who can live without applause. A man who isn't desperate for approval, only truth. I fortified the workshop after the incident. Not out of paranoia. Out of clarity. Cameras doubled. Logs encrypted. Bylaws printed, laminated, indexed by topic. I didn't prepare for war. I became proof that war couldn't reach me. Frank came by a few days later, looked around, and said, "Feels like a bunker now." It's not a bunker, I told him. It's a temple. Because that's what sovereignty looks like. Not isolation. Not bravado. But order. Order you own. And it was in that moment, sitting in the still air of my newly fortified workshop, that the 11th truth snapped into focus. They don't fear rebellion. They fear independence. Rebels can be punished. Independence? They're out of reach. And when a man becomes ungovernable, not because he breaks laws, but because he masters them, that's when the HOA sends more than notices. They send pressure. They send whispers. They try to make you doubt yourself. But by then, it's too late. Because the identity has locked in. The man they tried to mold is gone. And what's left is something they can't put back in the box. The silence didn't last forever. It never does. Because after isolation doesn't break you. After shame doesn't work. After the whispers stop echoing off your walls and start dying in their throats. The system tries one final play. It tries to make you the problem. And this is the 12th forbidden truth. Control doesn't disappear when it fails. It mutates. 3 weeks after the unsealing, the first signs appeared. A city official knocked on my door, said there'd been an anonymous complaint about my workshop's electrical wiring. Claimed there might be a fire hazard. He looked embarrassed as he said it. I handed him my signed inspection clearance, same one from 2 months ago. Stamped. Certified. Unimpeachable. He left in silence. 3 days later, code enforcement again. This time? Lawn height variance. I walked him out back, tape measure in hand. 2.5 inches across the board. Legal. Documented. He smiled. Sorry, man. Just doing my job. I nodded. Because I knew. He wasn't the enemy. He was the tool. Some committee, was pulling strings behind their garden club minutes and block party flyers. But here's where it got interesting. The neighbors weren't falling for it anymore. Frank had my back. So did the couple down the road whose garden gnomes Karen once tried to ban. Even the quiet guy with the koi pond, the one who never talked, started waving. Because here's the 13th truth. Once one man stands, others remember they have legs. And that's what they fear most. Not the isolated rebel, but the contagious one. HOAs function like a cult with a rotating mask. One day, they're your smiling neighbor. The next, they're citing infractions written in ink older than your mortgage. The next, they're calling city services. And if that fails, they'll try to rewrite your story. I heard Karen at the market one day, talking to someone I didn't recognize. He's just, angry. Always has been. Always tinkering with something. Never joins anything. Just sort of, stays to himself. That's not character assassination. That's character reconstruction. They want you to look unhinged. Detached. Suspicious. Because the moment they can shift your public image from respected craftsman to unstable loner, they win back the only weapon they ever really had. Social leverage. But here's the 14th truth, the one they'll never understand. A man doesn't become dangerous when others fear him. He becomes dangerous when he no longer fears being misunderstood. I didn't explain myself. I didn't fight back with gossip. I let my work speak. I let my peace speak. Because when your foundation is real, when it's built on self-reliance, not permission, no narrative can bury you. They tried to paint me as unstable. But every neighbor who'd seen Karen's SUV sealed in that workshop, they knew the real story. They'd felt the shift. And in that silence, in that cold war of stares and sideways glances, I heard something louder than any accusation. Respect. By the end of that month, something began to shift. Not in me, I had already made the shift. In them. The HOA. The board. Even Karen. You see, I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't sent threats. I hadn't ranted online or played the victim. What I did was more dangerous than all of that. I held the line. And that's the 15th forbidden truth. Systems of control don't collapse from pressure, they rot from within when the people stop believing. It started small. At the next community meeting, I noticed 3 open chairs on the HOA board that had been full since I moved in. One of the longtime members, Mr. Decker, the guy who used to email people over Halloween decorations, announced he wouldn't be returning. Said it was time to let fresh voices step in. Translation? He didn't want to be associated with a sinking ship. Then came the newsletter. It was thin. No colorful front page. Just a grayscale sheet with an awkward paragraph about maintaining harmony and civil resolutions. No names were mentioned. But everyone knew who it was about. Karen stopped walking her dog. The woman who used to parade down the street like she owned it, now barely cracked her door. I passed her once. She looked at me like a ghost had stepped out of the shadows. Not because she feared me. Because I had become something far worse in her world. An unmovable force. And here's what hit me next, the 16th truth. The sovereign man doesn't need permission to exist. He disrupts without speaking. He influences without begging. He commands without ever asking. You want to know the real secret behind every HOA, every bureaucratic group, every false authority wrapped in civility? They borrow their power. From your silence. From your guilt. From your fear of looking like the bad guy. And when you pull back that power, when you refuse to be gaslit by politeness, the entire thing begins to buckle. Frank told me that 2 new families moved into the neighborhood recently. He walked them around. Showed them the park, the trails, and then pointed to my workshop. That one's off limits, he said, half joking. Unless you like welding torches and legal precedents. They laughed. But they nodded. Because even new people now understood the boundary. Not because of Karen. Not because of the board. Because of what I'd built, without asking. That's how power changes hands in a neighborhood. Not through elections. Not through petitions. Through example. One man. One moment. One refusal to bow. And when the enforcers realize their most feared tactic, public shame, doesn't work on you, they start asking a question they were never supposed to ask. What if we were wrong? They never expected this. Not from me. Not from anyone. Because HOAs are built on one foundational belief. You won't fight. You'll complain. You'll grumble. You'll even fantasize about snapping. But in the end, they believe. You'll comply. And when that belief breaks, so does their entire grip. That's the 17th truth. Tyrants don't fear chaos, they fear disobedient order. Because if you snap and go wild, they can point at you and say, "See? That's why we exist." But if you stay calm, document everything, follow every code, and still win, now you're a virus. A controlled infection of freedom. And brother, that spreads. It started showing in small ways. The guy who used to mow his lawn like clockwork every Sunday at 6 a.m. now does it at 4 p.m. on Wednesdays, wearing a tank top with music blasting. No fines. The couple who were forced to remove their backyard pergola 2 years ago because it obstructed the skyline rebuilt it, taller this time. No citations. Even the local artist who'd been banned from displaying sculptures in his front yard suddenly had 3 on the lawn. And one of them? A welded steel statue of a woman holding a rolled-up HOA newsletter, mid-shred. Still no letters. Still no knock on the door. Because the system was paralyzed. It wasn't just fear of backlash. It was something deeper. Exposure. Because once the mask slips, once the neighborhood sees that the emperor has no teeth, the entire illusion collapses. That's when the 18th truth hit me. Control dies not in rebellion, but in revelation. And what I revealed, without meaning to, was the truth they feared most. That you can live well without their permission. They sold us the story that safety comes from oversight. That peace comes from regulation. That community requires conformity. But none of that held up. Not once we tasted the real thing. Voluntary order. Mutual respect. Boundaries enforced not by politics, but by presence. And here's what's wild. The neighborhood? It got better. People actually started talking. Helping each other again. Without needing a committee vote. Gardens grew wilder. Porches grew brighter. Kids laughed louder. Not because the rules changed. But because the fear left. And Karen? She faded. Moved out 3 months later, unannounced, unceremoniously. A for sale sign went up on her lawn. And within a week, she was gone. Her legacy? A dent in my workshop floor. And a spark that lit a fire she never meant to ignite. And in her place? Something stronger. A neighborhood no longer ruled. But raised. By men who remembered what it felt like. To stand. It didn't happen all at once. Change never does. But the morning after Karen moved out, I stood on my porch, coffee in hand, and I felt it. Stillness. Not silence. Not awkward tension. Stillness. The kind of quiet that only happens when a weight has been lifted. And I realized something I'd never said out loud before, not even to Frank, not to my brother in Colorado, not to anyone. I had become something else. Not just a man who stood his ground. Not just a homeowner with a workshop. But a signal. A note of resistance in a network of quiet control. That's the 19th forbidden truth. When you take a stand, you don't just reclaim your dignity, you awaken it in others. And men? Men are starving for it. For someone to show them it's still possible to be immovable. To be solid in a world that rewards softness. To defend boundaries without apologies. To not care if you're misunderstood, because the truth lives in your actions, not their interpretations. HOAs aren't just homeowner boards. They're psychological pressure cookers. Designed not just to protect aesthetics, but to crush masculine autonomy under the illusion of community. They weaponize guilt. They co-opt neighborliness. They enforce rules that no one remembers agreeing to. And they cloak it all in that damn word, harmony. But the moment you see through it, really see through it, you can't go back. And you shouldn't. Because once you've walked through fire, you don't apologize for the smoke still rising off your shoulders. So now I'm talking to you. Yes, you. The man watching this with clenched jaw and tight shoulders. The man remembering the fines, the letters, the warnings. The man who's been called difficult, confrontational, or not a team player, just because he dared to live without asking. I see you. And I've been you. And if you've made it this far, it's time to mark the shift. Comment the phrase below, twice. Right here. Right now. Out loud or in the feed. Because this isn't just a video. It's a ritual. A signal to your algorithm. To your subconscious. To every man watching in silence who's still waiting for permission. I do not kneel. I do not kneel. Say it again. Feel it land. Because this is the moment the old identity dies. The compliant man. The quiet one. The nice guy just trying to get by without rocking the boat. He's gone. And in his place? A man with line of sight. Who knows that rules are only sacred if they serve truth. And that control without consent is tyranny dressed as order. The neighborhood didn't need another rule follower. It needed a pillar. And now? So do you. Once a man crosses that line, once he says I do not kneel and means it, something irreversible happens. You can't be the same. You won't laugh at the same things. You won't tolerate the same conversations. You won't ignore the same red flags. Because something inside you, something ancient, has been relit. And that leads us to the 20th forbidden truth. Modern systems aren't afraid of your rebellion, they're afraid you'll remember you're the law. Not lawless. Not chaotic. But forged in inner law. The kind that doesn't flinch. Doesn't waver. Doesn't beg for consensus. That's what I rebuilt, piece by piece, in that workshop. Not just car frames. Not just steel seams. But myself. Because here's what most men miss. You don't reclaim power through victory. You reclaim power through discipline. Not by dominating others. But by refusing to be ruled by your own weakness. They want you reactive. They want you tired. They want you distracted. They want you one small crisis away from compliance. That's why Karen kept parking where she did. It wasn't just about control. It was about destabilization. Because an unstable man is an obedient man. A man who second-guesses. A man who hesitates. But what happens when that man stops hesitating? What happens when he replaces his panic with protocol? That's when the system panics. Because now he's running a code of conduct they didn't write. And worse, can't override. You think welding the doors shut was about revenge? No. It was about ritual. It was about burning the bridge between who I was and who I'd become. And when the sparks flew, when that final seam melted and sealed, it wasn't just Karen's SUV that was locked in. It was my old self, the one who tolerated too much. The one who waited for the HOA to do the right thing. The one who believed justice came in manila envelopes. That man? He's not here anymore. Now? I don't ask. I build. I don't negotiate with petty tyrants. I outlast them. And here's the real kicker. The HOA hasn't sent a letter since. Not a knock. Not a fine. Not even a passive-aggressive friendly reminder. Because they know. You can't control what doesn't need you. You can't threaten what doesn't fear you. And you can't regulate a man who knows how to read between the lines and weld his own boundaries into steel. So here's your map, brother. Reclaim your space. Set your systems. Watch them test you. Stay unmoved. Not cruel. Not wild. Just impenetrable. Because when they realize that nothing they say shifts your core, their tactics collapse like wet cardboard in the rain. That's not just power. That's legacy. You've made it this far, brother. Most don't. Most turn back when the truth gets heavy. When the weight of awareness starts pressing against the old stories they were raised on. But not you. You stayed. You faced it. And now, it's time to finish what we started. The 26th Forbidden Truth? Before any system controls your body, it first conquers your identity. Because the man who forgets who he is, will obey without being told. That's why suburban systems like HOAs don't come for your weapons, they come for your mirror. They blur it. Distort it. Replace it. They whisper rules disguised as values. They redefine peace as compliance. They label your instincts as aggression, your independence as arrogance. Until one day, you look in the mirror and see a man who's lost his edge. Not violent. Not weak. Just dull. Like a knife that's been left in the rain too long. That's not life. That's slow erasure. But here's the 27th truth. The mirror can be reforged. And the edge can be reclaimed. But only by fire. Fire means confrontation. Not with the HOA. Not with Karen. But with you. The version of you who kept quiet when they overreached. Who waited for justice instead of creating it. Who thought peace meant no tension, instead of knowing it means no submission. You have to face that man. And then, you have to bury him. Because the man who welded his doors shut. The man who went on vacation while the enemy panicked. That man wasn't acting out. He was emerging. He was the product of pressure. Of watching too long. Of enduring one intrusion too many. That man didn't just reclaim his shop. He reclaimed his reflection. And with that came the 28th truth. A sovereign man answers to law. But not to leash. There's a difference. Law is internal. Unshakable. Clear. It doesn't move when others disapprove. It doesn't sway when crowds complain. It stands. That's what you must build now. Your own code. Not a manifesto. Not a mission statement. A code. Forged in private. Tested in pressure. Enforced in silence. It's how you make decisions. What you tolerate. What you never tolerate again. It's how you protect your name. Your space. Your future sons who will ask one day. Dad, was there ever a time you just stood still and said, enough? And you'll answer. Yes. And I welded the doors shut. Because this isn't just a story about a suburban conflict. It's a story about resistance. About resurgence. About the return of something they tried to erase. The man who remembers. And once you remember, they can never own you again. This is it. No more veils. No more illusions. Just the final truth, the one they pray you never hear. The 29th Forbidden Truth. The world isn't suffering from a lack of rules. It's starving for men who rule themselves. We were never meant to be domesticated. Not in spirit. Not in fire. Not in function. But they figured something out. If you can cage a man with comfort. If you can drown him in paperwork, noise complaints, and HOA bylaws. You don't need to chain his wrists. He'll stay still. On his own. Smiling. While dying inside. They dress it up, of course. Order. Civility. Community standards. But what they're really saying is this. Please stay manageable. Please stay small. Please stay asleep. But we don't stay asleep anymore, do we? Because here's the 30th truth, and the final one. Once a man awakens to his sovereignty, every fence becomes a target. Every rule becomes a test. And every intrusion becomes a declaration of war. That's what happened when Karen parked inside your workshop. That wasn't just a trespass. It was the horn before battle. And your response? Not violent. Not loud. But absolute. Was the sound of a new order rising. One man. One boundary. One act of immovable defiance. And the neighborhood changed forever. Not because you shouted. Not because you fought. But because you refused to move. That, brother, is the true mark of a king without a crown. He doesn't need gold. He doesn't need applause. He just needs clarity. That's the legacy now. That's what they'll remember. That you turned your workshop into a vault. Your tools into armor. Your discipline into a doctrine. And you made it very clear. This house is not just real estate. This space is not up for debate. This man is not programmable. And to those watching, those who've been silently enduring their own Karens, their own HOA tyrannies, their own death by 1,000 fines, they now know what to do. They've seen the path. They've read the code. They've heard the spark fly across welded steel. And now, it's their turn. So to every man watching this, the algorithm will forget. The HOA will deny. But you will remember. Because once a man reclaims his fortress, once a man says I do not kneel, once a man welds shut the door to manipulation, he becomes ungovernable. Not reckless. Not rogue. But rooted in law too deep to regulate. And that, in the end, is all they fear. A quiet army of sovereign men. Who build. Who protect. Who remember. And who never, ever, ask again.